All right, joining me live right here on the broadcast from Birmingham, UK, is Scott Lucas, Professor of International Politics, Clinton Institute, University College Dublin. Scott, always a pleasure having you here on the broadcast with me. Diplomatic talks to halt the war have stalled yet again. Hamas wants the Israelis out. US said that's totally unacceptable. What part of Hamas' response has been rejected so strongly by the US?
Well, I think it's important to explain what's happened over the last few days to get full context. Earlier this week, Hamas said it had accepted an outline of a proposal by the Trump administration envoy, Steve Witkoff, for that 60-day ceasefire. And as you mentioned, there would be some hostages, dead and alive, released at the start of that 60 days and some at the end of the 60 days. But when Witkoff took that response to the Netanyahu government, it was the Netanyahu government that rejected it and said, no, we don't like some of the terms in here. So Witkoff went back to Hamas with a revised proposal. And Hamas is objecting to a couple of things in that proposal. The first is that the Israeli government is insisting that it be allowed to maintain an occupation of Gaza with at least 3 military zones. One on the Israel-Gaza border, one in the south on the Gaza-Egypt border, and one across the center of Gaza. And secondly, and I think crucially, Israel is not giving a guarantee that at the end of the 60 days, it will hold off renewed military operations. In other words, that this ceasefire is only temporary with no view to it being permanent. And Hamas is particularly wary of this because you may remember that under the ceasefire we had in January that lasted for 6 weeks, as soon as it ended at the start of March, Israel not only resumed the bombing and the killings in Gaza, they then imposed this humanitarian blockade, which is threatening the life of almost every single person in Gaza, and Hamas does not want to return to that.
Scott, at this point, I mean, the visuals we're seeing coming in from Gaza, they just keep getting worse and worse and worse. It's months on end of this constant war, death that we keep seeing coming out of Gaza. At this point, who do you feel is running out of time? Is it Hamas, given that all of Gaza is now on the brink of famine and the death toll keeps mounting? Or is it Israel, as we see internal and external pressure mounting on Tel Aviv?
It's the Gazan people. Look, the context here is that Benjamin Netanyahu, the prime minister, has said that any ceasefire would be temporary. His defense minister, Israel Katz, has said that if Hamas does not accept Israel's terms, then they'll be annihilated. What that means is that the bombings, the attacks on the ground, and effectively the humanitarian cutoff, because this token humanitarian effort through an Israeli-run group, the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, as you're mentioning right now, has already ended in bloodshed, with now 39 Palestinians killed this morning. This is just going to go on day after day after day. And I have to say that while Hamas started this with the mass killings of October 2023, what the Netanyahu government is now threatening is that if the Gazan people don't capitulate and accept occupation, and it would be an occupation, then every single one of them is at threat from, if not being killed by the bombing, then starving to death. You can call that whatever you want. You heard the Israeli protester call it genocide. I don't use that term, but the threat here is against the entire Gazan population.
I hear what you're saying. And Scott, the original proposal included a 60-day truce and a phased hostage prisoner swap. At this point, with the way things have progressed, and it almost seems like a repetition of history, because we've seen this same rut between Israel and Hamas go on for months on end at this point. Is there any part of this current plan of the ceasefire that can reach fruition anytime soon?
If Hamas was willing to accept an Israeli occupation, and if they were willing to accept Israel's threat to renew military operations at any time, then Netanyahu might agree. But Hamas is not going to agree to that. Hamas effectively would then be facing an Israeli ultimatum that we could kill you at any point. The only way that this changes is something that you referred to in your report, and that is thousands of Israelis turned out last night to demand that the Netanyahu government accept a compromise which includes pulling back from the occupation and pulling back from the threat that the ceasefire is only temporary, those protesters include families of hostages who are very strongly saying, look, we want to get our loved ones home. That pressure, if it was included Israeli officials and former Israeli military figures, that pressure might get the Netanyahu government and its far-right ministers to back off, but I don't see it happening in the near future.
All right, that was Scott Lucas joining me from Birmingham, UK. Thank you so much for making time for us, Professor Lucas.
Thank you and your viewers.